Hey, I'm back. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about magazines, what you can expect, their base pads, and magazine springs, so that you have a holistic idea what to expect when the time comes that your magazines perform exactly how you intended because you knew better because you watched my video. Well, the main focus of this video is what happens when you load a magazine and you forget about it years later and then decide that you're going to get down to business. What happens? Are surplus magazines good? Or should you buy new magazines, load them up, and forget about them? Or should you load a magazine up and go right to duty and expect the absolute best performance and not ever have to worry about a bad magazine? Should you rotate your magazines so that your spring gets some downtime? Or should you just omit 2 rounds for reliability purposes, such as what the Vietnam era veterans did? It worked really well for them. But I'm going to touch on all of that to give you guys an idea, so you don't run off and buy a ton of surplus magazines and expect the best, because that's an incredibly terrible idea unless you can't get magazines for a particular firearm. And if that's the case, that is a firearm that you should not use for self-defense. That thing should be in a display case somewhere as a collectible, because if you cannot get serviceable parts for your firearm, it should never be relied on for self-defense because, well, you can't maintain it. Hello. So that's it. So that tells me, if I want a gun for self-defense, I'm going to go with what the military and law enforcement, that the professional security ops people use, that they rely on. You want the stuff that they're using because their stuff is getting serviced on a regular basis, and you'll be able to have parts that you need to keep what you have going. If they're having issues with them, they're very quickly going to get resolved because they have a professional standard that has to be maintained, and their lives depend on their firearms. What I have here is I have 10mm magazines, base pads, mag springs. I had a Glock that was 45 ACP, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all because the amount of residue and blowback junk that clogs the slide action parts tends to create an awful lot of striker chipping that isn't to my liking. So because I got stuck with this firearm, I wanted to play around with it and see what else I can do. Many people convert it to 10mm, which is not a bad idea because it's a little bit smaller than the 45, but they've run into problems with the extractor because the 10mm is smaller, so that extractor has to go in deeper. If the slide does not allow that kind of draw, or grasp on the 10mm, you're going to run into reliability problems with it. Not a good idea. Can it work? Of course. Would you rely on it for self-defense if you're out in the woods and a bear charges you? Oh, no. No. You don't use converted guns for that purpose. That's just for the range, and I suppose you could hunt at distances, far distances, to give you enough time to correct any issues that may happen. Because when you engineer guns yourself or try to reverse engineer a gun, even to recalibrate, you're going to run into problems. Because everything that gun was initially designed to do in an OEM form is out the door. Everything's a variable now. It's up to you if you want to play around with engineering, but not when you're out in the woods and a grizzly bear charges you. You're going to need some really good shoes. Another caliber that the Glock 21 is converted into is 40 Super. And 40 Super it's like a 45 ACP shell, but it runs a 10mm bullet, and it uses a small rifle primer. It's basically a 10mm that's beefed up. It has a lot more case neck tension than a 10 millimeter does. It's kind of appealing to a lot of enthusiasts of having the most powerful platform possible. I don't know if it's the most powerful load out there, but it's pretty devastating considering you can get beyond 1,800 feet per second. They're 100 and I believe it's 35 grain. There are certain bullet weight that when they're joined with particular caliber groups, they perform like fantastically. Like that's the sweet spot. And then if you go over the weight, it gets really terrible. And if you go under the weight, it gets really terrible. Like, for example, 9 millimeter sucks when you get past 135 grain. A lot of people argue with me, but if you wanted to carry a 38 that's really small, be my guest. Because, 38 tends to do really well in the heavier calibers up to 158 grain. And it really sucks beyond 100, when you start getting down below 110 grain. Where the 9 millimeter excels. And then 40 caliber from 135 grain up to, I don't know, maybe 164 or 165, you get some pretty fantastic results. And then when you start going heavier, you start getting slower rounds. So you're starting to deal with kinetics and inertia. You want a round that's heavier when you're running those slow sluggers so that they can penetrate. But, 45 does really well from like 200 at 200 grain. It's fantastic, I think, in my opinion. You could go heavier, but when you start slowing those bullets down, you can see them go down range. And 230 grain 45, ACP, you could see light glinting off those bullets as they fly down range from light to light to light. That's pretty slow. But it doesn't have to be fast because of the weight of the bullet. It's been time proven to be the man stopper. And in some cases, although I would not recommend it, people have killed bear with it because it is a low velocity round and you're probably not aiming for the head because it'll probably bounce off. We're getting to why this analysis. It's critical to know what you're working with. I loaded these magazines, these two guys here. And I forgot about them for over 2 years. They were bought at the same time, loaded at the same time. I loaded them by piling the rounds in as many as it would hold. And then I forgot about them because I wanted to see what I could expect. Being that it was a converted caliber and it wasn't like designed to be that way. What's going to happen? And then this guy over here is a new magazine. I have not loaded this up completely and let it sit. So it doesn't have a load set. These two guys right here have load sets. And a load set is when you load it up and the spring decides to relax because it's like a battery. And that's how you have to think about springs. They're very strong when you test them right out of the pack, and then you put them into your device and you let them sit. So what happens is they take a set and they don't have as much, I guess you can say, free space to be whatever they want to be. Now they have to do a job. That's what you're running your stuff off from, is that load set. It could be a problem if your spring isn't made right or if it's a wrong material. Let's get to the point. We have two kinds of magazines out there. We've got the single stack. A single stack, the follower goes down. You go straight down. And the rounds are exactly on top of one another. It's regarded as one of the most reliable magazines because the spring just goes up and down. So there aren't too many variables with the way the spring cycles. It's a very predictable path. And it's easy to figure out in terms of engineering. So this is ordinarily it's a 10 round magazine for 10 millimeter, but because 40 Super is a 45 caliber diameter, you won't be able to get 10 in. So it looks like I have probably 8 or 9, even though it's lit at the 9. Because the The diameter is much bigger, but 10 millimeter magazines are slightly more pinched down than a 45 magazine. But the Glock uses the same base pads and followers and springs, regardless if it's a 10 millimeter or 45. So the reason why you'd want to use a single stack is for reliability purposes. Because when you get into a double stack over here, what you got here, the rounds stack at an angle. You know, and what happens is the spring now has to twist and torque in ways that the single stack does not. This is a different mag spring for an entire platform altogether, but this isn't a Glock spring, but I'm just using this to show you a little bit about what I'm talking about. This is a single stack spring. It's not consistent like that. It's a single stage spring, meaning that every coil that you see is the same. These are pretty reliable. Then you have a double stack spring. That's a double stage. And the reason why they call it double stage is because the spring turns down to a smaller diameter. So when you start getting spring sets on these, a lot of crazy things happen. Like right here, you can see the top is kind of angling. And when you compare it to something like this, look at that. See, this guy is already acting crazy. I think this is a standard Glock spring. And this was like a Korean Glock type spring, which is a little bit softer. But you can tell the differences in how they load set. This guy here probably has some cycle time on it. But when you look at them, let's see if we can get this right. See that right there? So the OEM spring, look at that. Yeah, I might have some problems with this guy. That's probably why I took it out of the magazine a time ago. And I probably had some problems with that. The rounds coming up and hanging in the mag tube. So double stack magazines are not the most reliable, period. You know, you can believe what you want, but you're kind of seeing it. So let's talk about loading and forgetting, if it's a good idea. Well, I've loaded this guy and I forgot about it. But I said, hey, you know, this will be a good video subject because this will clear up a lot of arguments back and forth. So now we don't have to argue because people will say, oh, well, it's a 40 Super. It's not the right caliber for the magazine because they don't know how Glock platforms typically use 40. The 45 uses 10 millimeter and 10 millimeter uses 45 components. And the only difference is the height to where the round sits. But because 40 Super is a massive 10 millimeter caliber, it wouldn't matter either way. It would just sit lower in the magazine. And this tab right here would help control the feed. So this is what happens. Oh, look at that. See that? You have a controlled feed. So if I use a 45 magazine for 40 Super, what can happen is that extra tab support will be less. It may even be lacking. And so when you do 40 Super conversions to your 45 ACP Glocks, you want to use a single stack 10 millimeter mag. Eventually, when I get to this guy, the double stack, you'll see why. You know, factoring in it's a double stack. The way the spring behaves is differently than what a single stack would give you. So, okay, so I loaded this guy and forgot about it. Oh yeah, before I get too far into that, this tab is designed to keep the rounds inside the magazines from spilling out. So when you have it in a book bag or duffel bag, glove box, whatever, if you're military or police or security ops, these things have to travel with you. The last thing you want is, the rounds to spill out when you drop your magazine, or, stuff like this to happen, from shifting around in your mag pouch. You throw your vest, it's got some mold set up on there, and it might use a lot of flexible nylon web, and all of a sudden this happens. Oh my gosh, the bad guy. Yeah, that's gonna have some problems going in. And even if it isn't all that way, let's say it makes it to about here, you might end up having a feed failure when this thing strips off when you go to reload. So Glock on their 3rd generation and 4th generation, I don't know how the 5th are, they've included this tab right here in the front of the magazine to prevent that from happening. You'll see a line under your Glock barrel when it comes to reset the feed, and that line is that metal part of that magazine kissing the bottom of your barrel, which is normal. There's nothing wrong with that. It's supposed to be there. If it's not there, trust me, after you shoot a bunch of rounds, it will be there. So no problem there. But in this application, it assists the feed. So this is what happens. Look at that. Uh-oh. See how slow that was? See how slow that was? Oh, wow. I'm going to probably run into one. See, if you go too fast, like this, and like that, you might end up crashing the bullet into the tab. So this guy here actually ran really slow. So because it ran slow, it's probably slower than the cycle rate that the gun can operate on. So what happens, well, if your gun's jacking back and slamming forward, it may not grab the round on the back part. And it might actually cut right here, on the belly part of the shell, and you end up with a jam. That's not good. This magazine right here, the spring should be replaced. It's not good. I was actually expecting it to crash into the tab and it wouldn't feed. Okay, we're gonna go to this one. See if we have the same result. This one here is performing. Oh, no, that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. That's not what you want. Yeah. You think you can trust your life to that? I don't think so. You're gonna have to have some really good sneakers. Those boots that you wear out there. You're gonna have to be a real super trooper to run away from a running bear. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to happen to show you guys. So what I'm doing is I'm running some kind of, this isn't really considered cycle time because none of these magazines have been shot inside a pistol. So the spring didn't have to deal with vibrations and like the forces of being pinged, so to speak, when these things go down. Causes the springs to vibrate like a hammer smacking something metal. That pinging causes the spring to shrink even more. And, that's referred to as cycle time. Because when the gun's firing, there's a lot of vibration and impact forces that causes a spring to shrink. This magazine spring is terrible. Terrible. This mag here, I'm going to replace the spring to this. This is unacceptable performance, and it doesn't work. You might get the top one off because the spring resistance gets stronger the more it's compressed. But, as you can see, I bet, when these guys smashed into the tab, that if I waited a period of time, they would come up to the top and then they would feed. But that's not going to be harmonized with your slide function, and you can't rely on that at all. So, yeah, there you have it. If you load it and forget about it, that's what you get. Okay, so we got a double stack. This one here does not have a load set. So we'll get a spot on analysis here. When you put a spring in a magazine, and as the magazine sits without any rounds in it, it'll take a set. It's called a load set. But in terms of reliability and what all the experts say on the web, and they're talking about what I'm doing here. I'm loading the magazine and allowing the spring to compress, and it's going to find its relaxed spot where it wants to be. It's trying to settle into the job, but I'm not liking what I'm seeing here, like this, because this is a double stack magazine. You can see how that slight twist of the follower plays on how your mag lips support your rounds. So look at that, boom, not even. We do not have liftoff. This shuttle is crashing. Well, I can't use this for self-defense, and I can't run this in a double stack. But if I bet you if I work her back and forth, get her to come out. There we go. This is why you don't use, gotta be careful not to cut yourself on the feed lips. There we go. This is a new magazine without a load set. There we go. But there we go. Uh-oh. Got a blowout. Get this guy off from here. You don't want to touch ammunition because, you get toxic lead on you, and it can be absorbed into the bloodstream, and it could deposit into your bone structures. And then when you have a stressful encounter, like you're hauling something, and it could cause stress fractures to the bone and release the lead toxin into your blood, and you can have a toxic effect happen to you until your body cleans it out. So you don't want to get so comfortable with lead. Or, even cases are recycled range brass, and they contain lead. And I find it incredibly reasonable, or very reasonable to believe that the type of materials they use to make shells would also contain lead, because it's a source material that's available, and of course they're going to use it. So be careful with that stuff. And after you shoot your gun, you get a lot of lead gas that you inhale, so it's going to get into the bloodstream to be filtered out. So you'd want to take magnesium so you can flush your kidneys, and you take this stuff. It's called cilantro. It's a blue algae. It causes the metals to congeal. Well, I guess it means stick. And your body can get rid of that faster. And that's about all you can do with that. And it might help to donate blood. But it'd be you'd be a terrible donor, because somebody would be getting blood that has lead in it. It's not enough to kill you, but you just want it to cycle through as fast as it can be. But just be careful with that, guys, because you want to be around to tell these kinds of stories after 20 years. Like me, I've been doing this for a long, long time. So that's what you can expect from magazines that you load and forget about. Slow cycling and or no cycling. And obviously, if the magazine does its own thing, takes a coffee break on you when the gun's like running the assembly line, so to speak. All you guys that work in industry, you know what I'm talking about. That's a problem. Pretty sure by now you understand all of that. So I'm going to move on now to base pads. What you can expect when you want that extra support on your magazine. If that's a good idea, what will happen or what could happen, So, yeah, everybody likes extra support. You feel confident, like, yeah, I got this. It's a good feeling of confidence, right? You got all full finger support. And some people like extra rounds. So they'll get a bigger extension that serves as a base pad. And they also do this to get past legislation for magazine capacity. So if you have a 10-round magazine like this one here and you want a 12-round, you snap a +2 on there. And then you might have to go with a stronger magazine spring. You might get away with it if the spring's new, but that's entirely up for your experimentation because that's outside the OEM design, and I wouldn't recommend it. But all three of these magazines are 10-round magazines, which probably would be more compliant in a lot of those non-friendly gun states, but I don't know how they'd feel about you carrying a bullet that is consistent with 10 millimeter power for concealed carry, because if you run like a Full Metal Jacket bullet in this, it'd be incredibly devastating. It really would. But from what I've learned about these guys is when you get to about 185 grain, you get some pretty awesome performance. But when you start going heavier, you're kind of like side by side with 10 millimeter. But the idea is that you would increase the cup pressure, which is the case pressure, by having a stronger neck and having a stage here. When the case swells, it actually holds the case extremely tighter in the chamber, so it has like a brake effect on it when it gets to recoil. So this thing actually recoils like a 22 caliber. It's much less than a 10 millimeter, and I don't understand why the videos I'm seeing on the internet, people like having a hard time with it, because I've shot this caliber in 200 grain, and I felt more kick with some of the 22s I've shot. Maybe I'm like really strong and non-recoil sensitive, but I find it kind of hard to believe that the videos out there for 40 Super are even remotely close to being true, because it's basically a 10 millimeter that has extra room for more powder. And then the shell design greatly reduces recoil, but we have some reliability issues when it comes to magazines. You need to have a single stack. Now, when you're squeezing on your gun, you're doing one of these guys here, they try to get you to do the cup and kind of thing like that. If you're Glock, you're more like this. You're gripping like 70%, 30% here, because the Glock uses a shotgun style grip. And, when you're shooting a shotgun that has that curvy neck, that's the best way you can articulate the Glock hold, because no other gun except a Jericho, that's a 9 millimeter made in Israel. I'm not sure exactly the make and model on that, but having that Glock butt is kind of, it has that sawed-off shotgun iconic grip from the olden days. And that's why a lot of the modern handgun techniques that they try to teach you don't work on the Glock. Your support hand is your grip hand, and then your your activator hand, if you will, or operable hand, it still grips, but because there's a safety on the bottom of the trigger shoe, you have a cross directional pull to activate it. And with the high grip, that's the most successful hold you can get with a Glock. And Glocks are designed to be shot with two hands, because single hand shooting a Glock with that Glock butt on it, the shots go really high. When you have a finger pad and you're like, oh man, there's a bad guy, like that, you convulse, right? And you get ready to shoot. You know, even with your other hand, you're pretty tense. If you're right-handed, this thing's going to torque this way. If you're left-handed, it's going to torque the opposite direction. So you got corner or corner. And what can happen is when you're like doing this, you're gripping it and you're right-handed and you're like, bad guy, get away from me. You're scaring me. I got my teddy bear. Makes the bad guys go away. Everything feels fine. No, I'm just kidding. Don't call your gun a teddy bear. That is so wrong. But the corner here can hit your trigger bar, because a Glock uses an internal trigger bar. It goes this way. So when you're right-handed and you're like, oh, bad guy, like that, just corner. Let's see here. Yeah. Right here, this one's kind of reduced because it was hitting the trigger bar. And when that happens, it affects the trigger reset. So if you have a shiny spot right here on your magazine, you might want to remove it, because what that means is you have a pressure spot and you're on totally good graces of the smoothness of your trigger bar when you're gripping this thing like this, you know. And if you're left-handed, you might have a shiny spot over here because the Glock frame is so flexible. What's the big deal? Well, that is the big deal, because if that bottom end's moving around, it'll give you the opportunity to apply more torque on that trigger bar. And that could also in turn affect the way that it activates the safety plunger, you know, to clear the striker. That could create striker chipping that Glock's known to have, and there's been a few official complaints about that. It's attributed to the flexibility of the frame and the way that trigger bar moves and tracks in the inside of the magazine well of the pistol. So I would not recommend finger pads. Find some other way to shoot your gun. And they also pinch. When you slam these guys in the front of the gun, if it extends beyond the grip, you know, extends, pow, and you got your finger right there, you know, it's all bulking out because you're gripping it, you're going to get pinched. So in this one, some of the edge had been reduced, so that does not happen. But that's another thing you can expect when you start using finger extensions that extend beyond the outer diameter of the front strap of your pistol. I don't think it's a good idea to have extra support like that. You know, I mean, there's other ways you can have extra support. You know, like get a gun that fits your hand, for example. That would solve a lot of problems. But it's not my place to say so, I don't feel, because I'm talking about Glocks and that little rinky-dink concealed carry pistols. You know, that they do work, but you're going to have to learn to feel your way around that, because if you need that extra support, it could cost you. You know, you could end up getting a failure to feed because it torqued on that trigger bar in such a way. Actually, I don't know if that would cause a failure to feed. It would cause a trigger to slow down, maybe not reset, but the little bump on the side of the trigger plunger, you know, safety plunger activator can stop the slide short of battery. You can cause a failure to feed in the late 3rd gen and 4th gen, and possibly, although I haven't had much time with the 5th gen, pistols. It's because they want to keep that trigger bar activating the safety plunger for the striker consistently every time to stop the striker from chipping on the window to the slide where it comes out. So this isn't top secret information. It's pretty obvious. If you own a Glock and you're not entirely biased, you could actually see it for yourself. But when it comes to your life, forget your emotional biases and go with what works. So now we're going to get to other base pads too. This one here is quite long. It's been ground down because I guess the particular Glock type pistol didn't have the window in the front, and it was removed. But it extends further than where it's supposed to be. So the same thing can happen where if you grip the magazine this way, it could stop the trigger bar, slow the trigger bar, or move it entirely off the safety plunger in such a way where the striker crashes into it. This stuff happens more with the larger calibers, more than the 9mm, because Glock pretty much has a pretty awesome 9mm, and it has very few problems except brass to the face, and that's a whole nother video. Let's talk about extra rounds. So this one's a Glock type base pad for, looks like a 33 round magazine. I think it was like a Korean variety. Well, it had some problems, and so it was dissected for parts. And their mag tube is fatter, so this will not work on a standard Glock magazine. You want to use probably a base pad that's set up for a Glock, because this thing will be loose, and if you drop your magazine, it'll fall out the bottom and rounds will spill. 33 rounds will spill all over the place, and you might trip and fall and hit your head, and and the bad guy probably won't even have to attack you. You just kind of freak out and pass out. He wins, you lose, you wake up, your gun's gone, your wallet's gone, and you're in a hospital and you're like, what happened? You might think that I'm being a little facetious, but that's a real reality. He might he might leave the magazine and steal all your ammo the way ammo prices are now. So, so anyway, don't rely on the additional base pads that give you the additional rounds, being reliable, because they're not reliable. Because when you elongate that pad, you provide additional mass for impact to knock that off the mag tube and cause the rounds to spill out. And also, as I discussed earlier, when you're squeezing your gun and the magazine turns like that, it could actually cause a braking effect on your internal trigger bar that your Glock platform uses, because the frame is so flexible and wiggly, which kind of gives Glock an incredible credit to the lubricity of their polymer. They have like what I feel to be the world's best polymer for firearms. Like, I've never seen one crack. I've seen it chip, but never crack. And no matter how gritty it gets, it still provides lubricity, even if it's abraded, which kind of like shuts down a lot of other guns. The other gun manufacturers' polymer, because when their polymer abrades, it's, it has an adhesive effect on moving parts, unlike the Glock platform where it's entirely resilient to that, which is pretty amazing. But when you use an extended base pad, you have a sharp edge right here on the inside. And on the bottom of a Glock magazine, you might have a little runoff from the polymer on the metal that they use, the metal lining. And so you have an area of transition where you have a lot of variables for your spring to operate on. So if it catches that corner like that under a load and it binds, well, you're out of business, It's not going to feed. See that? What they do to prevent that kind of thing from happening in good faith because they want you to buy their stuff and they want you to believe in their stuff. They have liners like this. It's at an angle, so when everything that moves, if you move something on a surface here, you get incredible resistance forward. And what happens is it starts to roll or move at an angle. Everything has a type of drag to it seems. So things move at an angle. So consequently, instead of being squared, they cut this at an angle so that the spring can move, much to that nature. So you put the insert in there, and that insert, it covers the sharp edges to where the spring, your spring could catch. So here we go. Look at that. Is it going to catch? Well, you know what? I think we have a winner here, but I wouldn't trust it. If I dropped that thing, it'd probably pop off from the magazine and spill 33 rounds all over the floor, and I'd probably slip on it if it was a tile floor and bump my head. And I'll probably wake up next Thursday wondering where my wallet is, and people are like, "Who are you? You didn't have any ID on you." It's like, yeah, the dude stole my wallet. Come on, man. They're like, you had an empty gun on you. It's like, dude stole my ammo. Because when that happens, when you have a firearm failure, at that point, the gun's useless to a bad guy. The only thing you could use it for is intimidation, because if it didn't work for you, they don't want it. I mean, okay, got to keep this serious, because, emotional bias is nothing to joke at. It could hurt somebody's ego, especially when they're invested in a particular emotional idea that defies logic, because what I've showed you here, this is all real world stuff. And I'm not here to sell you anything, but if you're curious about 40 Super, Lone Wolf used to make conversion barrels for the Glock 21. And that's where you would go to get a barrel, and then get your factory Glock 10 millimeter single stack. You won't get 10 rounds in there. You'll probably get 9 or 8, but it's the more reliable magazine, and you've actually seen it feed this stuff. So if you have a Glock 10 millimeter that has a double stack, and you need home defense, don't rely on the double stacks. Go right to the single stack and use that for your self-defense magazine. And then when it comes time for a reload, you can use your double stacks. So priority 1 has to work. Priority 2, you may never get to it, because 10 rounds is a lot of ammo. If you learn accuracy techniques, I might actually do some videos on that, and it'll put a lot of gun trainers in check, because it's not rocket science. And believe me, if you can get what I've showed you here, you'll be hitting the target. Like you won't pass that third ring at self-defense distances. And it's not that complicated. A lot of this, they put a lot of sales mystique in here, and there's a lot of taboo that's wrapped up around it, but it's not rocket science. So there you have it, guys. Everything you need to know about magazine springs, base pads, base pad inserts, extended base pads, factory magazines, double stack, single stage and double stage magazine springs, and additional modification if you don't want that trigger bar, breaking on your magazine when you squeeze the heck out of it, And if you decide you want additional capacity, always go with a bigger magazine, a longer magazine, than to add a base pad. In case you drop it, the pad doesn't break off and spill all your rounds out, so you don't end up tripping on your own ammo. There you have it, guys. Until the next video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and be very suspect of all those gun store commandos. So y'all have a good day, and see you in the next video if you like and subscribe. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Be safe. Bye.